So, thank you, Stefan, for the introduction, and welcome to my talk, Testing is Fun, with an exclamation mark, a question mark, and an exclamation mark. And yes, testing is fun, or my clicker is not working, or not, right. This talk is all about testing, why I think testing is fun, why I think it should be fun, and what we can do to make it as fun as possible. A bit about me. My name is Sandro Gehri. I work as a tech lead at Trenda. I work with PHP for more than 15 years now, and I started with Laravel version 5.x. I don't remember the exact one. And I do some open source contribution from time to time. For example, I contributed the mutation testing plugin to Pest PHP. And of course, I love testing. So, as a little warm-up, I have some questions for you. Please raise your hand if you like writing software. Perfect. And who likes to work with Laravel? Yeah, that was an easy one on the Laravel meetup, of course. Now, let's get a bit more specific. Who of you writes software tests on a regular basis? It can be unit tests, feature tests. Yeah, around half of you. Great. According to the State of Laravel survey 2024, last year, there are around 2/3 of the developers write some kind of tests on a daily basis. Now, the question I'm most curious about. Who of you likes to write tests? Ooh, 3.5. That's not that many. Okay, I hope I can tell you or show you some stuff that you maybe like. You like it more. So, but what are the reasons why you don't like it?
Bothering, of course. First reason is you when you're writing the test, you think, for what I have written this?
The reason why?
Yes.
Okay.
Because it's bothering some mockers you doing some looks like stupid things you write, but in result when it helps you,
when it's done, it's good.
When it works, you think, oh my god, it was very good to write it before.
Yeah, that's I think one of the common problems or common struggles when it comes to testing. So I think there are many, and one of them is insufficient knowledge or experience. Usually developers don't know where to start with testing. They do not trust in their existing tests, maybe. Maybe the tests are flaky or they are too slow. The code base they are working on is too old or is legacy code, and it's really hard to get started with testing. Maybe they have a lack of motivation, they find it boring and it's repetitive to write the tests. And last but not least, the time constraints. They think they don't have time to write tests. Yeah. And for sure, there are many more reasons why they do not write tests. As you can see, we have a lot of excuses why we don't write tests, but we can try to address them and find ways to work around these struggles. But first, we have to categorize them a little bit, and this is also the agenda for today. We start with why we write tests in the first place, then what we will test or what we should test, how we can organize tests, how you can write better tests. I tried to show you some tips and tricks, what can be done in this case. Then we have to talk about performance. Performance is often an issue when it comes to testing. And how we can be confident about our test suite. And in the end, I will show you some packages and a little bit of AI, how AI can help us make the testing life easier. Now, let's get started with an easy one, why we write tests. For me, the main goal and the main motivation to write software tests is to have a better life as a software developer. I want to be confident that my software does what it should do, refuses invalid inputs and actions from the user, and prevents users from doing malicious things. Well, this can be achieved with manual testing after implementing every feature. And to be honest, in most cases, it would be quicker to test it manually instead of writing an automated test. But in the long run, this would force me to repeat all my manual tests over and over again. And in the beginning, that's quite easy, but when the software grows and grows, it will be harder and harder. And we tend to only test the happy path and not all the security-related issues or the, in a form, for example, the validation tests and so on and so on. In all my projects I worked so far, one of my goals is to update the software as often as I like. So I want to be confident to run Composer update and then deploy the software to production without testing manually for hours and hours. So I need a test suite that makes me enough confident to deploy whenever I want to. And as I said before, when we are testing manually, we tend to only test the happy path and not form validation and errors and so on and so on. Now, next, when we heard about why we test, we should talk about what to test. And of course, it depends. My recommendation here is to start with the things that are crucial for your business success. And this could be things like a checkout form or a registration page for new users. And then look out for the low-hanging fruits, which in many cases already gives you a lot of value when it comes to testing. For example, smoke tests. When you start with a brand new Laravel application, you get this little test here, which is a smoke test for the home route. This test gives you already much more value than having no test at all. Next, we look for things that we can test in isolations, like actions, jobs, listeners, stuff that we can test easily. And last but not least, we should test everything that is security related, like policies, authentication, and stuff like that. But what should we not test? And of course, it depends again. But as a general rule of thumb, you should never ever test the functionality of the framework itself and not of the packages you have installed. It's the maintainer's job to test what the framework and the packages does. If you do not trust them, use another package or contribute back to the package and improve their test suite. And of course, do not test things that are not important for your business. Maybe you can remove the code, but maybe you still need it, but it's not that important. You can leave this on the side. And I usually don't write tests or automated tests for temporary code. For example, migration commands to migrate data from an old database structure to a new database structure. And one thing more, you have to decide on which level you want to test, if you want to run full browser tests or only tests on the backend side. I don't know who of you has seen the Nunos Pest v4 announcement yesterday at Laracon US. I think everyone who has seen this talk will agree that the opinions on browser testing will shift quite a lot in the future because he introduced some really nice API to do browser tests with Laravel. Yes. Next, organize tests. Organizing tests organizing the tests in a project is very opinionated. My personal preference is to mimic the application directory structure in the test directory whenever possible. And something else I like, here in this example, you can see we have a modularized application. Here are two modules and they both have their own test directory located in the module. I like to have the tests close to the source code and not in a general testing folder for the whole application if it's possible. To make this work in Laravel and Pest, you need to modify these entries in the phpunit.xml file, and you need to update the pest.php file that all these tests are run in the modules as well. Just as a side note, you will get a link to the slides in the end if you want to look it up later on. Now, organizing the test is not only about organizing the files, it's about organizing the tests within a file. I usually start with the simplest happy path test I can imagine. Then I continue with tests, maybe with the edge cases test. So this discount calculation, if it can handle a 0 discount or 100% discount, so these edge cases. And then in the end, I would test the exceptions or the non-normal usage of the, in this case, of an action. For other kinds of tests, you need a different order that fits your needs. For example, when I test a form, I usually start with a test that fills out the form with proper values. Then I leave out some values in the next test to test the validation, and in the end, maybe tests for malicious or security-related issues. How exactly you organize the test doesn't matter that much, but try to be as consistent as possible. And if possible, all developers in your team should use the same patterns. And if it's in an ideal world, if you have multiple projects, organize the tests in all the projects in the same way. This not only helps you to navigate you quickly through the test suite, it also helps you to identify if a test is missing or if there is something off with these tests. One thing to keep in mind, if you reorganize your application code, you have to reorganize your test suite as well. Now, write better tests. This part alone could fill an entire talk, but everyone will understand something different under the term better tests. But what we will do, I will show you some tips and tricks from my learnings from the last couple years writing tests. And we always start with a written test, and we will try to improve or see what's maybe off or not that good in a test. For that, we head over into PHP Storm, and we need to, no, this was wrong. I should, so mirror, that's what I wanted. Now, perfect. Let's start with this test here. This is a test for the post. There is a post model and we have a post policy. It's fairly a simple policy. Everybody can view posts, but creating, updating, and deleting is only allowed for users that are admins. The test structure is the following. We have a before each. So before each of the tests below here, blah, blah, these two statements are executed. A user is built and an admin is built, and then we check if they are allowed to do this or not. In this case, for example, a normal user cannot create a post, but an admin can create a post. I think this is fairly okay below here, but here is something that we can improve. I think that's not very readable right now. So what I like to do is see if this works, to have something like that. We want to create a user that has the user role or the admin role. I think that's already a bit more readable. And what we can do in Laravel, we can go to the factory and add some states here. Instead of passing in the permission, we can directly call this method here, user or admin, and all the past tests should still pass. Right. I think it's more readable now, but we can even improve it further, and we can, maybe the naming is not bad, not that great from user create, but I think for the admin it makes more sense. User factory admin create. Once again, the same, we don't go into the role factory, we head into the user factory. We add another 2 states, but they look a bit different. We don't pass in a state directly. We wait until the model, in this case the user, has been created, and after the user has been created, we update the user. So we are looking if we already have a role with the admin permission, and if not, we create one, and then we associate it with it. You can do whatever you want in here. You can have complete seeders in here, but the main advantage is for me that the code is now, if we revert this one here, this code is much more readable than the one above. So when you return to your test in 1 month, 5 months, a year, it's much more clear what this means. And here you have to think through, oh, it's a user with a role, with a permission. Yeah. So that's one of the things I like to do, is to make it really readable and really clear in a test, that when you come back later, you can see what happens, especially if a test fails at some point in the future. You want to read quickly what the reason is or what's going on in this test. With pest, we can do much more things like that. Here's another test. We have a Livewire component, which is responsible for creating new blog posts. And this is the test. We load the Livewire component, set the title, the content, call the save action, and then we expect, when we load the first post from the database, that the title is the one we submitted here, the content, and that the user is the user that was logged in when the user was created, the post was created. This test passes as well, and I think it's fairly readable. The only thing I don't like is the thing below here. User ID to be user ID is understandable, but I think it would be more clear if we could say the user should be the user. But sadly, this does not work. We would expect that this will work, but the to be of past.php compares the 2 objects. And the user we have created here and the user that is loaded from the database is the same user, but technically not the same object in PHP. So what can we do? We can go into the past.php file and intercept the expectation to be. So we can tell past when a modal, there is an expectation on a modal class or a class that's extends a modal, we can intercept the to be. Then we expect that the value that is under test is a function on every model. In Laravel, you can call is with a second model, and it tells you if it is the same model based on the ID and not based on the object reference in PHP. And then we check if this is returns true, and if not, we return an error message. So now when we run the test again, this test passed, and I think it's much more readable now than before. So this exactly this part of this snippet of code is something that I have in every application that I test with PEST-PHP. Yep. We have, what did I do? This was not expected. So the user test. We have a user test, and here is something similar I wanted to show to you. We have two users, an admin and a user, with the factory functions or the states we defined before. And then we expect that the admin is an admin. Admin is this function here on the user that checks if the permission is admin. And if is admin to be true, and for the user is admin to be false. I think should work, but it is readable, but not. I don't like it that much. What I would prefer is to have to be admin and not to be admin. Oh, Copilot already knows what I wanted to do. Perfect. Sadly, of course, this is not working because PEST doesn't know what to be admin should be. Once again, we go into our pest.php file and we do not intercept the expectation. So we extend the expectation. So we add a new expectation. We name the expectation to be admin. Then to start, we check if the value under test is a user. Otherwise, we throw an exception. And if it is a user, we expect that is admin to be true. And if not, we show this error message here. And now, when we run the test again, it will pass. And I think that's much more readable than before. These are fairly simple examples, but I think it's very important to think about the readability of a test when you write tests, just to help your future self when you come back to the tests in a couple of months. Something similar, no, it's not similar, but something else I like to do. No, this was the wrong test. Sorry, create post form test. This one here, it's a test we were in before. We have this test, we set the title and the content, and then we call save. But what happens if we change our requirements and the abstract of a post is a required field? We can run the test again, and it will fail with a fairly weird message. Failed, asserting that null is identical to test post title. Why is the title of the first post null? We can add a DD here, and what we then see is the first post is null by itself, and whatever you add to null in PEST-PHP still is null. So it's quite confusing, the output from PEST-PHP in this case. What we can do to improve this, we can assert that there are no errors on the form before we assert that we have the first post. When we now run the test, we can see, oh, our Laravel component has an error on the abstract because we didn't provide the abstract. So now it's much easier to see what's causing the issue in your test. And I would really recommend that you always add assertions like has no errors, session has no errors, session is empty, whatever you will need, but to assert not only the happy paths and think about what happens between saving and the testing of the result. It's the validation, and you should add some sort of an expectation there as well. Let's quickly revert this one, otherwise our test suite is not passing. Two small things I want to show in the end. Test, post, test. fairly simple one. We have an action, this delete post action, that takes a post and deletes the post, and then we can assert that the model is missing in the database. When we run this test, the test passes. Funnily, when we remove the act, it still passes. The reason for that is I made a mistake here. I called make instead of create, so the post wasn't persistent in the database at all. When we change this to create, run again, of course it will fail. When we re-add the action, it still fails. When we head into the action, we can see why it fails, because the action actually does nothing. Running again, of course, it works now. What I want to say with that is, when you write a test, what I always recommend is write the test, the setup, then the acting part, and then the assertion. And when it runs, just one time, remove the act part and run the test again and check if it really fails. Otherwise, your test is worthless. That's something that happened to me more than once. And the last one, we have here a test for the welcome page. It's similar to the default test. The only thing I've added here is that we assert that we can see this text here, the let's get started. When we run this test, it works. Great. What happens when we remove the translation? Who thinks the test will still pass? Let's try it out. The test still passes. The reason for that is that the translation, if we add a dd here, returns the string you pass in when it cannot find something from the key. And the same happens in the test and in the rendered blade file. So both are equal and it can find the text again. So my recommendation is never ever use the translation helper in a test, except you have a good reason to do so. The right thing to do is to use the plain string you would expect, and now it fails. And when we revert this one, it will pass. Once again, something that happened more than once to me. Yeah, that's it from the tips and tricks session, and we will go back into the presentation. Stop mirroring. This was the write better tests. Now, performance. We have to talk about performance because your test suite will run fairly quickly when you start and will get slower and slower when you add more and more tests, and you will get more and more frustrated because you have to wait until your test suite is complete or run complete. There are many things you can do. For example, and that's the simplest one, just use the parallel mode. It runs the tests in parallel, so it uses all the processors your machine has. So this is a real output from one of our applications. These are around 1,300 tests within 24 seconds. It contains live wire tests, filament tests. Hitting a real MySQL database, I think that is not too bad. One thing to mention here is that start with parallel testing right from the beginning, even if you don't need it, because sometimes you can have problems with caching and stuff like that. And when you start from the beginning with parallel, you don't run into weird issues later on. When you set up a new Laravel project, you have a refresh database trait being used that refreshes the database when the test starts. I really like a package that has a fast refresh database trait because it only migrates the database if the migrations have changed. With the default one from Laravel, it always refreshes the database, which makes it a bit slower, especially if you're not running in a in-memory database. Schema dump, when you have a lot of migrations, you can dump the schema and then it will everything in one SQL dump, and this is much quicker to restore the database from an SQL dump instead of running all the migrations one by one. I usually do the schema dump once a year, and then I move all the migrations into the folders from the past year. You have a prune option there that removes all the past migrations, but I don't like it because you lose the history, how your database structure has evolved. Something fairly simple that we saw before, and think about if you need to create the model in the database or if it's enough to only make the model in memory. It's much faster in memory, especially if you have to build up a lot of models to make the database happy in kind of all the foreign key constraints maybe my model has. Then HTTP requests, I always look that I prevent hitting an external API or something else from the tests, because there are dependencies, an external API is slower, maybe it's not available, so try to prevent this, and Laravel has a nice method, and the Saloon package has this similar thing as well. Sleep, I don't use sleep that much in my code, but if you have to sleep, don't sleep like the normal PHP function or the native PHP function. Use this sleep helper from Laravel, because you can fake the sleep in your tests. Otherwise, every test execution sleeps for 2 seconds. Use the latest versions if you can, so upgrade to the latest Laravel version, the latest PHP version. In the test suite I showed you before with the 1300 tests, upgrading from PHP 8.3 to 8.4 gave us around 10% performance improvement, and upgrading to Filament version 4 gave us another 10%. I'm really looking forward to bring this to production. It's on a side branch right now. When we talk about performance, here is an option, this -- profile with PEST, that helps you identify slow tests. So here we can see the 2 slowest tests that already made up a fourth of the whole test suite of 15 tests. So you know on which tests you have to work. And something that what you can do if a test is really slow and you can't make it faster, group them in a group, maybe call it slow, and then when you run the tests locally, exclude this group to have a nice quick test suite. Locally, don't exclude it in your CI pipeline. Maybe it's an important test in there. Building confidence about your test suite. Yeah, as I said before, for me it's one of the most important things to be confident, otherwise the test suite isn't worth that much. Best PHP and other testing tools gives you a lot of options here to build confidence. One is if you have flaky tests that fails randomly. This is of course a made-up example with this fake boolean here, but it fails around 1 out of 100 runs. If it happens in your CI pipeline, it's hard to debug, but PEST-PHP has this nice repeat helper here. Then you can repeat the same test locally 1,000 times in one go, and then of course you will see for sure a failing test, and it's much easier to debug. So get rid of all the flaky tests, and destroy your confidence for sure. Something else, especially when you are new to a project, run PEST with this -- coverage. Then you can see which tests, which files are under test, and which lines are tested. This gives you a rough overview about the quality of your test suite. Something else I really like, is the mutation testing concept. You can run mutation testing on a specific file, and it helps you identify much more, especially on business critical parts of your software. For example, here we can see that every mutation, I don't talk too much about this is, but it detects that the lower boundary check of this if statement isn't tested properly, and then you know that you should add or adjust a test to properly test the lower boundary. There is only one mutation where it is. Yeah, one was untested, so the upper boundary is tested properly, but the lower boundary isn't tested properly. This -- mutate is available in PEST since version 3, so roughly about 1 year. If you have questions about mutation testing, I'm happy to talk about it after my talk, and otherwise you can find a recording of a meetup talk about mutation testing on our YouTube channel. The link is below here. Right. Something else I would really recommend: run your tests on the database type you use in production. That's not what's recommended most of the times, and the default of Laravel is the in-memory SQLite database. Sometimes databases behave a bit different, so I really prefer to have the same database type in my test suite. When your application grows and you need some special SQL features like the vector similarity search on Postgres, SQLite does not support it, so you have to anyway switch to the right database type, but do it up front. It will help. It's maybe not that performant, but there are better options to improve the performance. Yeah. Last but not least, make your life easier, tools and AI. The first tool we saw already before, this fast refresh database package, is something I really like. Something else that helps with an application that has no tests or smoke test for the routes is this Buffy package. You can easily test all your get routes with a single line of testing. That's the only thing you have to add, and it tests all your get routes of your application. And last but not least, AI. Already GitHub Copilot was a game changer for me when it comes to writing tests. It was really good at writing tests when you already have the application code written. But this is with Junie. Junie is the AI agent from JetBrains, available in PHP Storm. This one took it really to another level. So we can, let's see if this works. We saw this discount. Here, this is the test. I asked Junie to write a test for this fairly simple action here, which only calculates a discount price and does some checks on the percentage up front. I told Junie to test the edge cases as well, so it started with regular tests for normal cases, then it wrote tests for edge cases, then it handled very small discount percentages, very large discounts, zero original price, negative original price, very large original price. Then it added some tests for exception handling, and then it added tests for really large floating number issues. So that's much more than I would ever test for this fairly simple action, but it helps a lot to see the edge cases, and it's easier to remove some of the tests you don't want to have. So if you haven't used June yet, give it a try. I think it does really a great job. For example, if you have 3 actions, 2 are already tested, it will first open the tests that are already existing, checks your structure, tries to mimic your structure. Yeah, it's really a game changer for me for writing tests. Where is my mouse? Here it is. Oh, let's summarize. We talked about why we test and what we test. We talked about consistency in your testing structure. We talked about, or I showed you little tips and tricks. We talked a lot about performance because I think that's very crucial for being satisfied and happy with testing. We talked about confidence when it comes to testing, about tools and AI. And yeah, I think I don't talked about PEST before that much, but when I saw the talk from Nuno yesterday, I think PEST v4 will make testing even more fun. Yeah, happy testing, and thank you very much for listening. And here's a QR code and a link for the code repository, and it contains a PDF file from all my slides. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions regarding testing and why it's fun? No one.
Great.
In your workflow, when do you write your tests? Do you write like some before writing the feature or during, or you write only the feature and then you test it? Like, what do you recommend?
It depends.
Depends.
No,
of course.
I like the idea of TDD. It's helpful in some specific cases. For example, when writing this action, this discount action, I think it makes a lot of sense to write test up front because you think about all the edge cases when you write the test up front. But when you do some greenfield testing, you don't know how your application code will look like, how something works. It's not possible to write a test up front, or it's not worth to write a test up front. And I think with AI, it's often more helpful to write the test or let AI to write the test. It's much harder for AI right now to write your application code based on the test instead of the opposite way around. Depends what it is. Of course, for such a simple action, AI can do this properly, but for guessing how the filament, for example, the filament methods are named, that's much, much harder for an AI than writing a proper test for a filament component.
Thank you.
Welcome.
You have a question?
I have a question
Yeah.
regarding performance. You showed the profile method of PEST. Did you ever was in the position where you needed to dig deeper and figure out why a test is actually slow? Like, for example, if the user cannot authenticate with a password to figure out, it's maybe a bad example, but is it a queue system? Is it a database? Is it a cache?
Yeah, that's a hard one. Sometimes you can open a test and it's easy to see, or you open the application code and see a sleep in there or whatever, and then it's very, very easy. Otherwise, what I usually do, I die and dump at some stops and or add some how is it called? Some tracing about the timing, and you have
some benchmarking.
Some benchmarking within the test. Yeah, and sometimes you cannot make a test faster. The test cannot be faster than the application can work. So
I had a similar situation, and it was like test took maybe a second, and I thought, man, this is slow, but I couldn't make it faster, and maybe 100 milliseconds faster. But is it worth it to invest so much time to make this faster in this single test? So.
Yeah, the problem is when you start here with 15 tests and 2 of them are a bit slower, you don't care. But I encourage you to fix them when you write the tests, and not when you have 1,000 tests and then you see, oh, some of my tests are slow and now the whole test suite is slow, but the tests that are slow are written half a year, 1 year ago. It's much harder to make them more performant instead of doing it right away. So running this profile is useful when you're writing tests. You can add filters as well, so you can profile only a single test file, that one you have newly added.
Great. Any other questions? Then a big applause again for Sandro for his talk. Thank you.